week was probably the biggest red flashing signal that you could think of in terms of our government structure and our structure as a country as a whole is falling apart at the seams. You have 5 events that I'll discuss after the intro music here that I think kind of encapsulate the fact that our way of governing ourselves is not working. What kind of change that needs to be, we'll talk about that as well. But things are looking like very muddy water at this point, and I want to talk about it. I'm your host, Salvatore Assante. This is the We the Patriots podcast. Let's get right into it. So with everything that happened last week, I'm sure that a lot of you didn't follow every single event, but I kind of want to lay them out first before I get into the weeds here. So you may or may not have seen that the Southern Poverty Law Center got indicted by the federal government in a grand jury in Montgomery. That was very interesting, to say the least. You also had the Spirit Airlines buyout, the Forever Wars continuing on, kind of as we've been talking about for the past few months now. Another assassination attempt on President Trump, or at least on high-ranking members at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. And lastly, yet a soldier that was arrested due to his betting on prediction markets. All these events, I am stipulating, are kind of going out to prove that our degradation of our society is very, very far along the tracks and probably is not coming back. And I will discuss that in depth with each and every segment. So first and foremost, the Southern Poverty Law Center. What happened? Well, I don't have every single detail, so I'm not claiming to be an expert on any of this, but just to lay it out to you guys, the grand jury in Montgomery, Alabama, indicted the Southern Poverty Law Center on 11 different counts. They included wire fraud, false statement to banks, and conspiracy to commit money laundering. Wow, that was good English. Conspiracy to commit money laundering. Now, what the alleged crime is that the Southern Poverty Law Center is supposed to be is an organization, a nonprofit that is dedicated to lowering the amount of biased crime across the country, providing legal support, and focusing on civil rights in general. And what it was found, or what it's alleged, is that this organization actually funneled over $3 million over basically the past decade or so in donor funds to informants tied to violent extremist groups, the very groups that much of their existence is set out to eliminate, erase, or dampen their impact, dampen those other groups' impact on the U.S. political stage. Those groups include groups like the KKK, Aryan Nations, and the National Socialist Party of America. And the fact that this took so long to get found out is, I think it's kind of proof in the pudding, so to speak, on just how much fraud and abuse and waste is existent in our country. You know, Southern Poverty Law Center is one of the bigger NGOs, or I don't know if they're technically an NGO, but a nonprofit organization for sure, domestically working in the U.S. And they're one of thousands. Thousands might even be a low number. And it makes you think back to those days of Doge early on in the Trump presidency, Trump 2, I should say, where the fraud and abuse was being touted as being massive and being not only corrupting in terms of the amount of money, taxpayer money, that is being funneled into these groups and being wasted, but also the amount of degradation under the surface that's being done. You know, if you have a group like Southern Poverty Law Center that's donating millions of dollars to groups like the KKK or Aryan Nations, you essentially have one of the largest nonprofits, or one of the larger nonprofits in the country, helping to stunt up these groups. And what a lot of conservative arguments over the past probably decade and a half, ever since I've been paying attention to politics, at least probably longer, is that these groups really, not that they don't exist, but these groups really don't have any footing in America. Groups like the KKK, groups like the Aryan Nations, yet they're getting propped up by groups like the SPLC. Now, again, with that not being found out for as long as it has lasted, you have to imagine that there is a lot of different events that were tied to this group or that helped get funded by this group. And one of those events was the infamous Charlottesville attack. There is allegations that some of the funding that was used by the Southern Poverty Law Center was sent into the head of the white nationalist group that led that, and also helped to pit the Unite the Right rally against the Antifa rally that was very prominent back in 2017. And with all that said, you can only imagine how many different events across the past decade and a half that the indictment is carrying over. It's going back to about 2014. How many events were stoked and embers kept swept in by the Southern Poverty Law Center and their funneling of money? And when you look at it on the whole, the amount of damage that's been done in terms of race relations ever since realistically Bush got out of the presidency in 2009, it really makes you think where the money for all of this has been coming, where the drive has been coming, because at the end of the day, race relations really improved from every anecdotal piece of evidence that I've ever heard throughout the 90s, and even going back, of course, if you want to go all the way back to something like the Civil Rights Act back in 1964. So carrying that all the way to today, and why race relations are in a worse place than I would venture to say that they are, or than they were, I should say, back when Bush got out. And I think a large portion is groups like the Southern Poverty Law Center. Now, I'm pretty much guaranteeing you, I'm just taking a guess, but I think it's educated that they are not the only group that is doing things like this, covert operations, whether it be done by our federal government or adjacent to it, or people working on their own missions, so to speak. Either way, they can't be the only ones that are doing that. And the kind of hypocrisy and the exposing of the Southern Poverty Law Center has been, well, I think it's good, but it's also scary to think that this has been happening for so long. Now, moving into the second thing that I think is of note over the past week, and that is the Spirit Airlines buyout. Now, what's essentially happening here is that Trump and the federal government are planning to, or at least floating out the idea of buying out Spirit Airlines in their second Chapter 11 bankruptcy filing over the past 3 years, I believe. It could be a tighter timeline, might be a little longer. But they're floating out, buying the airline to keep it afloat, and their main objective, allegedly, is to save the 14,000 jobs or so that the company is responsible for, and then try to sell the company once it's on a firmer ground for a profit. I have a major issue, generally speaking, with government intervention into the economics, whether that is talking about tariffs, whether that's talking about buyouts, whether that's talking about giving back-end deals to your friends or cutting out actual competition in order to enrich someone that you are connected to, whether that be for political gain, for friendship, what have you. This falls into that category, well, one of those categories, of course, and that is not letting the process of an economy and how an economy should be functioning and letting that play out, and instead intervening and using taxpayer dollars to do so. At the end of the day, that's what this is. We can make all the arguments we want about the war spending, which I will in a minute or so. You can make all the arguments you want about the billions of dollars going out to foreign aid. You can make arguments of all you want, but at the end of the day, the clearest example, and I guess just another example in the books of the government intervening into economics directly, is the Spirit Airlines proposed buyout. Now, the federal government blocked mergers previously. I believe that was mostly under Biden, but I believe something also came up under Trump as well. And essentially what's going on with it is that the government's deciding that, investing in our infrastructure, investing into our own citizenry, whether you want to talk about healthcare, whether you want to talk about infrastructure again, whether you want to talk about just the general well-being, or, reinvesting into the national debt. No, we're going to buy out one of the low-cost airlines and keep it afloat. At the end of the day, what I can only imagine actually happens is that it's no longer going to be a low-cost airline if $500 million or more is interjected into the company to try to keep it afloat. With that being said, very upsetting to me. It gives me flashbacks to, I was a kid, but time and time again, conservatives and libertarians are talking about the bank buyouts, the big bailouts of the Great Recession. And it just makes me think that we are on the path to much more insolvency in terms of companies, most likely banks down the road, as the economic situation around the country gets worse. And honestly, my fear, not being an economics major whatsoever, not fully understanding, is that there's so many other places for our money to be going, our taxpayer dollars to be going, and instead we're throwing them at failing companies. That doesn't really make sense to me. Now, the forever wars I mentioned are another huge factor of this, just money being thrown away. Trump, during his first run in 2015, was adamant about not getting the United States into any more forever wars, and in fact actually proposed getting us out of the Middle East. And instead, over the past 6 months or so, maybe a little bit longer, more like 8 to 10 months now, we have been engaged in wars and acts of war all around the globe. Whether you want to talk about Iran, whether you want to talk about the continued funding of Ukraine, or whether you want to talk about things that happened in Venezuela, constantly the United States under Trump's second term have been with other countries. And continuing on in that kind of quote unquote forever war mindset, maybe we are in different wars and not the same one, but at the end of the day, looking at it in terms of how much of our funds are being invested, how many of our young men and women in the armed forces are being put out to go operations in other countries instead of maybe not being in active military roles, being able to help our economy at home. This ongoing issue, I did an episode of probably a couple months back on just the entirety of the forever war spending, basically the terror war spending, and the total expenditure expected to be by 2030 or 40, somewhere around the $10 trillion mark, including interest payments and whatnot. What's happened under the Trump administration is that number is just continuing to go up. The reports that I was seeing, I don't know how accurate they are at this time, but the current war in Iran that is on pause for now has allegedly spent over $150 billion. That could be off. I'm not 100% sure. My estimation is that it's probably on the lower end, but I'm just stupid. I'm just taking a gander, taking a wild shot in the dark, and that being, of course, with the reports that I heard with the anti-missile technology that we used up, the constant sending of ships, attempting to blockade the Strait of Hormuz in retaliation. All of these things adding up, my guess is that we've spent a significant amount over that. And when you think about it, we've only really been engaged with them for, I guess, at the longer sense, you could say something like 2 months. It's a lot of money, man. It's a lot of money to spend that we already are not having. So when you look at the global tentacles that the United States is attempting to kind of throw their weight around with across the world, we're getting weaker and weaker just by utilizing our military and all of our assets for things that really a lot of people's minds are not very impactful. At the end of the day, if you look at the Strait of Hormuz in particular, it was not closed. There was no toll to be paid to Iran before this war, and now it's in flux. The ceasefire that's between the United States, Israel, and Iran is in flux. There's no concrete evidence that we are done with this war, and that is scary to think about. And looking back, of course, to the Trump promises, not only in 2016 and 2020, in 2024, a little bit less so, but still existed. He's failed. He's failed on this, and it's starting to lead into kind of a conversation, at least in my mind. This is exactly why the governing body of a republic, in our case, a democratic republic, and the idea of empire don't work. You could look back to the Roman Empire, right? Everybody kind of knows it by that name, the Roman Empire. They don't really know it by the Roman Republic. But what Rome started as, of course, was a republic, and it deteriorated into a large push of populism and militarism into essentially an autocratically run state. And that is how they got to be an empire, how they got to control as much territory as, if you go look up those maps and looking at it and you see the extent of where the Roman Empire actually got, and you look at it and you'll probably see a note. You might not see who exactly it was under, but it was under Emperor Trajan. It wasn't under the Republic. It wasn't even under Julius Caesar or Augustus. It was under Trajan, who came many, many generations after Julius Caesar, came many generations after Augustus, and went into this kind of mode where they being the Roman Empire, had one sole figure to rely to for almost all governing. Now, some of them were better at delegation than others, and some were not. The whole point of all of that rant is the fact that the only way that the Roman Republic was able to get itself into a mindset and actually follow through on empire across the known world at the time was to devolve into an autocratic rule and rule by an emperor. And unfortunately, that's where I see a lot of this going in our politics today. We still get to vote every 4 years, but when you look at it, both parties have been for these wars for decades now. Both parties have been for a lot of wars jointly for decades now. And really, the only time that you see a party turn into opposition is when they read the polls and think they have an opportunity to get into power. And yet, whenever things occur and the opposition party gets into power and there's still a war going on, well, in every case that I've seen, they just continue to fund the war. Whether you want to talk about Ukraine, Russia, or whether you want to talk about Trump getting into Afghanistan, it just continues. We have an essential uniparty, and it is getting to a point now where I really hope that, so many people you hear on big shows are talking about the American empire. The American empire is not healthy. We shouldn't have an empire. That's my whole point. My whole point is that we are not healthy enough to be an empire, nor should we strive to be an empire. We should strive to be the best that we can be domestically and in our own country. And right now, and for a long time, longer than I've been alive, we as a country have been focusing our resources outside of the body of the United States, and it is hurting us severely. Now, another thing that is just bizarre to me, I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because, to be honest, there's not a ton of information that's out on it, and a lot of it that you're seeing, or at least that I'm seeing, is massive speculation. But the assassination attempt at the White House Correspondents' Dinner really kind of blew me away. I was out to dinner with my family, looked down at my phone, and I see shots fired at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. Are you fucking kidding me? Again, this would be the third somewhat verified attempt on President Trump's life. So tried looking into it. Apparently, the suspect, Cole Thomas Allen, was ID'd, and tons of information came out with him within like the first 45 minutes, which was really weird to me. They went back and found, I saw some account posted that he had ties to donating to the Democratic Party. And when I looked into it, it was like $25 to Kamala's campaign. Very odd stuff. Allegedly, what the guy did is he charged a security checkpoint. He fired 1 to 2 shots, according to the security at that post. And then more shots were fired at Cole Allen after he had charged through the, whatever you want to call it, the station of men. What I found very interesting was that looking at the videos, and again, this is all speculative, I don't really have any idea, and it looked like the handlers, Secret Service men and women, went after Vance before they went for Trump, and there was also a lot of people in that room that were seemingly not really taken aback by this at all. You could look at Dana White's interview afterward. I thought that was just kind of ridiculous. But you look at Pete Hegseth walking around, he really did not look like he was trying to verify any threat whatsoever. It was a really, really weird look on his face, and just kind of in a way told me that something is up with this. Now, as more information comes out on this, I would love to share it with you. Right now, the information is very low level, but the whole point of bringing that up is that you look at the further degradation of what our democratic republic, or what our country really should be. And another assassination attempt on the now president is just kind of another check on the list here, unfortunately. And it's getting to a point that is really disturbing. Now, lastly, to kind of wrap all things together, I think that it's important to point out that we, the citizenry, are not the same as our leaders, and we do not live in the same set of rules. And the best point of that was that a U.S. soldier was arrested for his actions in the prediction markets. What he did on April 3rd, it's saying that's when he got caught. There was a Master Sergeant Gannon Ken Van Dyke. He was located in Fort Bragg, and he was charged with using classified information from the January 2026 Maduro capture to place a bet of roughly $35,000 and profiting somewhere around $400,000. Notably, this is the first insider trading prosecution on the prediction markets rather than there being, a stock trade or something like that. But that being said, the real point that I wanted to point out is that this type of action gets taken every single day by our lawmakers. They act with impunity for what I wager to be no good reason. They have the ability to insider trade on all the information that they receive, whether they are in Congress or another leadership position. They do not get in trouble for it. Whether you want to look at people like Nancy Pelosi, you want to look at Mitch McConnell, you want to look at Marjorie Taylor Greene, all of these people and many more, almost all of them, if we're being completely honest, almost all of them have profited tremendous amounts by being in positions of power, by having access to information that we don't have. And the fact that this man profits, say, roughly $350,000, a little bit more, and this man gets in trouble because he's just one of the peasants. He's one of the hands. He's not actually a part of that leadership structure. And yet all of these politicians get to make out like they are doing the right thing by putting this man behind bars. And yet we all are sitting here watching them profit off of their insider knowledge. It kind of gets to a point where you realize, again, I kind of mentioned it a few minutes ago here, but it gets to a point where if you're an observer and you're paying attention at least a little bit, that there is two sets of rules. You have the rules for the leading class, you have the rules for the leadership, and you have the rules for the peasants. And if you're not in cahoots with that leadership, or you don't have a relationship, you're not sucking their dick, you're not propping up their illegal pedophile rings, then you are on the other end of the stick, and very likely you are going to be prosecuted. You kind of saw some of this when Trump got out of office and they were going after him with every single legal part of the book. And it really rallied a lot of people behind the man who did not think that he did what meets the statutes in order to be arrested or charged. And then he went and turned into another person. Just when you wrap it up, when you're looking at all of these different instances, to me, what it's showing is that our society as America and our structure as a democratic republic is just fracturing completely, not just at the seams anymore, but it's getting to the core. And not only that, I think that the people who are anti-capitalist or anti-capitalism are showing to have more and more points. And my whole existence is that capitalism is one of the best things to ever emerge from human civilization. It is the best way of having people involved in a economy, in being able to move from one social status to another based on their movement in their lifetime, is the best operation and the best form of an economic structure that there is. And I still believe that to this day. That being said, when you have levels of corruption that are reaching like our soldier situation here, or our money being misused overseas, or being used to buy out airlines just because they are a low-cost airline and we don't want them to fail, you have these constant issues cropping up where it's showing that our capitalism is not really true capitalism. The market is not being allowed to be what the market is. You could also bring up tariffs in that as well. Any of these examples are going to show that whatever we have probably isn't capitalism. And yet the people that are criticizing our way of governing or our economy are going against capitalism. And at the end of the day, what I see, honestly, is just a rot. It is a rot from the inside out. It is a rot that is showing that our system of government is no longer working for the people. It is not a government by the people. And our economic system is having a tilt on the lever of power being used by our leadership and by our politicians. So, not to make this episode an entire, crying session, old man yells at clouds. I think that the whole point is that we need to look at how the heck do we get ourselves out of this? Well, number one is with the current leadership structure, we do not. So it's important moving forward that this collection of politicians, both left and right, do not get back into power. They do not deserve it, and they should not have an opportunity to. Now, with that said, the people that are voted in, that is hopefully allowed, they need to be with a core purpose and with, promises in their campaign that we all know get broken, but having them on record saying that they don't like the way that things are going. They want to pay down the debt. They want to get out of these wars in the Middle East and across the globe. They do not want to be the world's policeman. We need to fix our own streets first. And this rhetoric that could lead to a more prosperous nation here in the United States, if they do not have that, they don't deserve to be governing us. And I don't care what side of the aisle that they are on. If they can at least put themselves on record for being for these things, I think that they're worth a shot. And that's the only way out of this, in my opinion. We have a skyrocketing national debt that is speeding up every single day that we do not pay it off. If nobody is willing to admit that in a leadership position and is continuing to blow our spending out and do whatever the hell that they want, then we're going to be put in a position as a country to really lose every bit of hard work that our forefathers, our previous generations, and us ourselves have done over time. So when you kind of wrap it up, what it looks like is that empire is not working here in the United States. Our way of life in terms of our government structure is failing. And on top of that, the way that we are looking across the globe to other nations and peoples is pretty low. I think that there's ways out of it. It's going to be hard, and we're going to have to swallow a lot of shit for it. We're going to have to get ourselves out of positions that are putting us into trouble. And, looking back on what was promised to us and what was the campaign slogans by Trump, by really everybody in our entire lifetime, what we've witnessed is a complete failure. I think that we as the citizenry need to admit our fault in that before we can place the entirety of the blame on the people that are running the show, because they, at the end of the day, are looking out for their best interest, and what a lot of that best interest is profiting off of the broken system. That's about all I got for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed the show. If you did, please leave a like, subscribe there on YouTube or on Spotify, and that's about it. That's all I got. I will catch you guys next week. Peace out.
Wish I were the fucking state. I wanna be something, not nothing. Trapped inside my dream and I'm running away from these demons. But the feeling's so good, I'ma keep dreaming.